Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 4th of October 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to be joined by Vanessa Beeley today. A lot happening, but we better kick off with really the great effort by the Daily Telegraph to undermine Mike Veal's report into alleged child abuse with former Prime Minister Ted Heath. The Telegraph has worked harder, we think, than any other national paper to try and discredit this police investigation at every turn. Here's one of the reports: Heath's sex inquiry to allege the former Prime Minister abused youngsters at sea. But in the article itself, it then adds, but really this would have been impossible because he couldn't sail the boat on his own. And remember that the Wiltshire Police report into these allegations against former Prime Minister Edward Heath should be out tomorrow or possibly on the 6th. But I think the establishment is sweating Mike. And of course, this is getting to the heart of what drives British politics: corruption, criminality and child abuse. And as the former Tory whip Tim Fortescue said to BBC Camera, MPs came to us, the whips, with their problems. That included little boys, and we fixed those problems so the MPs would do as they were asked. He's talking about blackmail there, Mike.
Absolutely. Of course, mainstream media not covering anything that's going on with the inquiry at the moment. Is there even an inquiry at the moment? No one knows.
Stunning silence.
Stunning silence, which makes it all a bit ironic. Because the government's answer to all this is to invest £600,000 into what they describe as groundbreaking technology that allows internet companies to identify and remove indecent images of children from websites. It's being promoted or being produced by this Canadian company, cybertip.ca. It's called Project Arachnid, and apparently what it does is it fingerprints certain types of images, and then if it identifies those images on social media or other websites, it flags that up, and the owners of the websites are contacted and given the opportunity to do something about it. So that's their answer, Brian, to stick £600,000, which is a pitiful amount of money, into one cyber project to identify indecent images of children. In the meantime, what are they doing to actually identify the people that are making the indecent images of children in the first place?
Nothing.
Or that are trafficking the children from the Middle East, from Africa, from East Asia and so on? Nothing. So what are they doing about children who've gone missing from the care system?
Precisely nothing. What are they doing about the whistleblowers, including, of course, John Wedger from the Metropolitan Police? Well, he's being hounded, bullied, abused, and had his pay stopped. So it's quite clear to see. We'll stress the point for our overseas viewers. The picture we think we're looking at is a British government riddled with fraud, corruption and child abuse, or at least the cover-up of child abuse. It's not a nice picture.
No. So let's come on to sort of domestic stuff and cities. And, well, this is air pollution, all about air pollution. And Sadiq Khan, of course, really serious about this. He's released this report on PM 2.5, which is particulate matter in London. And it's particulate matter which is below 2.5 microns in size, very, very small, gets into the lungs, causes all kinds of health problems. So this release from the London Mayor saying that this is research based on the latest updated London atmospheric emissions inventory. It shows that London exceeds World Health Organization limits for damaging particulates at PM 2.5. It found 7.9 million Londoners, that's 95% of the population, are living with amounts of particulates which exceed the World Health Organization limits by 50% or more. The World Health Organization limit is 10 micrograms per metre cubed. Now the European Union's limit is 25 micrograms per metre cubed, but Sadiq Khan doesn't think that the European Union is right on that. The level needs to be lower. And so they said that half of this pollution in London comes from sources outside the city. But he said that he's mainly concerned about tire dust, brake dust, dust from construction and building work, and also from wood burning. And of course, recently he said that he wants to stop people using wood burning stoves. So here's what he had to say. He said, "It's sickening to know that not a single area of London meets World Health Organization health standards, but even worse than that, nearly 95% of the capital is exceeding these guidelines by at least 50%. Now, I thought this was pretty strange, Brian. This, to normal viewers of UK Column, maybe this isn't the normal story we would cover, but I thought this was it really stuck out for me for this reason. Because over the last number of months, almost on a weekly basis, the Public Health England has been pushing out this report, Environmental Monitoring Following the Grenfell Tower Fire. And what the message from Public Health England has been, bearing in mind the Grenfell Tower right in the centre of London, right in the middle of Sadiq Khan's map, what Public Health England has been pushing out is showing that on average, particulate matter is below the 10 micrograms per meter cubed level. So I'm confused about how it can be 50% greater than the 10. Now, what's interesting is that the Public Health England report is using PM10, which is particulate matter which is between 2.5 microns and 10 microns. And the question that I'm asking is, and maybe somebody can help me with this, the question that I'm asking is, would it be expected that particulate matter below 2.5 microns would be 50% more produced by this types of pollution than particulate matter between 2.5 and 10 microns? So fascinating that Public Health England feels that the PM10 scale is a better scale to measure at than PM 2.5, whereas Sadiq Khan thinks it's PM 2.5. Now you'll notice that, for example, in this time period, which is about the middle of September, there was a 2-day period where particulate matter was up around the 20 micrograms per meter cube level, and that, as I would suggest, is due to atmospheric conditions, maybe a high pressure system coming through, trapping dust in the atmosphere. But as you can see, throughout the month of August, September, generally particulate matter levels below the 10 micrograms per meter cubed level. So either Sadiq Khan is trying to present a political statement here with a view to dealing with diesel cars and lorries in London and with wood burning stoves, and there's a political Agenda 21 reason behind this, or Public Health England has chosen to use PM10 because it knows that the levels that it can publish for the area around Grenfell Tower are going to be lower. I don't know the answer to this. I'm asking the question. I've spoken to Public Health England earlier on today, Brian, and they've said they'll get back to me. I'm not suggesting that Public Health England is doing anything wrong. I think
but we want to get the bottom of the statistics.
I think it's much more likely that Sadiq Khan is playing games, but I'd just like to get to the bottom of this, yeah.
Well, we'll ask our audience today and listeners to see if they can give us any help on this. My personal opinion is that what you're seeing is Sadiq Khan install himself as the powerful, omnipotent future leader now running a global city. And they are going to want to bring in a whole range of legislation to show the power of this cabal that now runs London. So that's what I think it's to do with, are they suppressing true data around Grenfell? What happened to the asbestos out of that building, for example? I think something will be going on there as well.
Okay, quick advertisement then. Reminder that on Sunday, this coming Sunday, Alternative View 8.1, Brian, you'll be speaking at it. Patrick Henningsen will be speaking at it. Ian Crane, of course, it's his event. Dr. Graham Downing, that's in the Connaught Rooms in London, begins on Sunday at 11 a.m. And an opportunity to bring Vanessa in because John Pilger is heading up the bill on media on trial, which is being promoted by Frome Stop War. This is on Thursday, the 19th of October in Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. And Patrick Henningsen will be speaking at that as well. You'll be speaking, Vanessa, Peter Ford, and a number of others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would obviously highly recommend it. I mean, you know, we're living in such an insane age at the moment where Bana Alabed's book has just been published, Dear World, and is, of course, doing the rounds in New York. and in the UK. And of course, again, basically, this is children's literature effectively produced by a family that is known to be affiliated with Al-Qaeda in Aleppo and now in Turkey, which is Bana al-Abed's family, her father in particular. And of course, with the White Helmets being re-nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 2017, I mean, effectively, when we look at the number of Al-Qaeda members that are being platformed by our media in the West, or even, I discovered yesterday that one of the Al-Qaeda members in East Aleppo had actually co-written an article for the Times. We have this extraordinary situation, really, where corporate media is pretty much platforming an Al-Qaeda narrative, both in the way that they promote and support it, in Syria in particular, but also they're actually having individuals who are affiliated, who are actually members of Al-Qaeda and associated extremist groups in Syria, appearing on their channels and producing articles for them. So this event is incredibly important, I think, to really punch holes in the fabric of corporate media subterfuge, obfuscation, and downright lies.
And it says something, doesn't it, that John Pilger is willing to take part in this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He's definitely taking part in it. Yeah, so he will be speaking. I'm not sure yet of the running order, but we're incredibly honoured to have John Pilger join us. I mean, I think he must be all of our, certainly for me, one of the greatest influences of my opinions and learning curve on imperialism and on intervention on the media. So an extraordinary privilege to have him there, yeah.
Details of this are on Eventbrite with tickets. Do get along if you can. My understanding is that if there's any profit made out of this, that money is going to go to help the situation in Yemen. So anybody that is contributing to this is also contributing to that, and so I urge everybody to get along to this if they can. Now, Vanessa, of course, you began with Gaza really, and spent time in Gaza, you're working closely with Patrick Henningsen at 21st Century Wire now, but you still have your personal website, which is The Wall Will Fall. I was fascinated earlier in the week to see this and other mainstream media covering this issue of Hamas and Fatah apparently getting together, and Al Jazeera here asking, is Hamas-Fatah rapprochement a win-win deal? And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on this and what's driving it, and what the potential outcomes are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, this is an incredibly complex situation, and I think what everybody has to bear in mind is that at the core of much of what is happening in the region, but particularly in Syria, Syria itself perceives Palestinian liberation and freedom as the core issue in its resistance against the axis of imperialism and intervention that has been waging an illegal proxy war against Syria for the last 7 years. But what I think is quite interesting about this sudden evolution, or this sudden development of events, Gaza, we know, was literally bombed into oblivion in 2014. And of course, since then, it's been on 100% lockdown. The promised rebuilding has simply not happened. I was reading something the other day about the sheer depression and demotivation for a very young population of Gaza, 1.8 million, probably more now, but the majority of whom are in their sort of late teens, early 20s. So a very young population with basically no future, living a life amongst the rubble of war from 2014. The electricity is controlled by pretty much everything. All of their facilities are controlled by Israel, largely. And so what we've been seeing with obviously the advancing victory of the Syrian Arab Army and its allies in Syria, we've seen a degree of a rapprochement between Hamas and what were their traditional allies, Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. And I think what we're seeing now is a maneuvering by the Zionist entity, by the illegal state of Israel, to prevent any degree of this rapprochement with what they consider to be a very dangerous axis of resistance, of course, Hezbollah being their nemesis in the region. And so what we've seen now is a maneuvering and the bringing back in of Mohammed Dalan, who is a known rogue entity, certainly a criminal entity. He was responsible for creating effectively death squads in around 2007 that were attacking Hamas within Gaza itself. He's a known rival to Abbas, the current leader of the Fatah party. And he's been effectively absorbed into United Arab Emirates society and culture. And this is where this push is coming from. And again, this is very interesting because the UAE has played a very Machiavellian role in creating, or to a large degree, manipulating the rift between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And again, we're seeing them being employed here. Bearing in mind that, of course, UAE will be recognized very favorably by the neoconservative elites in America, but also by the Zionist entity itself. And basically what they're doing is trying to financially and economically drive a wedge between Hamas and its primary financier, which is Qatar. So we're seeing again UAE playing, as I said, this sort of Machiavellian role. Dalan has just met with a Hamas delegation in Egypt, and in June, Dalan actually negotiated with Egypt to deliver 1 million litres of fuel to Gaza, but only after Tel Aviv, in collaboration with the Palestinian Authority, had reduced Gaza's electricity by almost half. So we see again this manipulation of the situation. Tel Aviv will turn off the tap, and UAE has stepped in, or through Dalan, they've stepped in with Egypt producing the fuel to keep them going. So Gaza is always kept on this level of starvation, deprivation, humanitarian tragedy, which is just always kept from the brink by one of the many financiers that are trying to get a foothold there. And I think the big danger here is one, my fear is, and this was written about by an author called Oliver Tickle in 2014 during the war. We know that Egypt has basically erased Egyptian Rafah, the city of Rafah, or the town of Rafah, completely sort of erased it from the planet. It's been bulldozed away. And the great fear is that the Gazan people, having lived in such dreadful circumstances since 2014, may be tempted to be pushed out from Gaza and into the Sinai, which of course releases all of Gaza as real estate and territory for Israel to take over. And that leaves only some very small ghettoized areas in the occupied territories, which is still Palestine. So this is it's a very real danger, and there is definite maneuvering going on here. One, to get the UAE's foot in the door and influence on the power base, or rather the leadership in Palestine and in Gaza, in Gaza and the occupied territories. So it's a very difficult one to sort of disentangle, but Dalan is not a good element in this. He's a criminal, corrupt element that is being brought in by the Emirates to try and drive a wedge between Hamas and Qatar, but not only between Hamas and Qatar, to prevent, as I say, the rapprochement between Hamas and their erstwhile allies, Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah, because of course Hamas has been responsible actually for much of the destabilization in pockets of Syria. It has actually turned against the Syrian government during the 7-year war in Syria.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, look, let's move on to Syria and Sergei Lavrov's comments, speaking to an Arab newspaper yesterday, getting a bit cross, and rightly so, about the US and the so-called coalition's activities in Syria, and the continuing claims by the so-called coalition that it's having any major impact on ISIS at all. He was asked, how do you assess the performance of the international coalition against ISIS as led by the United States? What are the limits of the Russian role in the war on ISIS? And he said, I don't want to go into detail, but one should start by saying that from the point of view of Syrians and international law, this coalition is a gatecrasher in Syria. When double standards are applied, he said, when terrorists are divided into the bad and the not so bad ones, when the coalition recruits members on political grounds, disregarding the need for UN Security Council approval of its activities, one can hardly expect an effective fight against terrorism. He said the US forces' activities in Syria cause many questions. In some cases, these forces mount allegedly accidental airstrikes against Syrian armed forces, after which the Islamic State counterattacks. In other cases, they inspire other terrorists to attack strategic locations over which official Damascus has restored its legitimate authority, or stage fatal provocations against our military personnel. I would also mention several accidental, in inverted commas, strikes against civilian infrastructure that have taken hundreds of civilian lives. Our participation in the fight against ISIS is aimed at both ensuring the national security of Russia and strengthening global and regional security. The use of force alone is not enough to eradicate terrorism in the Middle East and North Africa. We're convinced of that. Our policy has an advantage, as it is not intended to serve vested interests and has no hidden agenda. In this context, we will further expand our efforts to settle numerous crises and conflicts in the region through peaceful political and diplomatic means. We would also welcome everyone who's willing to engage in this joint, honest work. And, you know, I know if I say this, Vanessa, that I'm going to be criticized as being a mouthpiece for the Russians, but the fact of the matter is that when you compare at least the outward look of Russia and compare that with the words and the deeds of the British Foreign Office and the US Department of State, you know, it's chalk and cheese, and there seems to be Russia every day seems to demonstrate a more mature foreign policy than we seem to be able to expect from our own so-called leaders.
Well, you know, it's extraordinary. They work on the basis of the supremacy of law, and that's the simple basis of their actions and reactions. Whereas our governments are demonstrating themselves to be lawless rogue states. The US coalition is carrying out, as Lavrov has said, as we've all been saying, but they're carrying out murderous campaigns inside Syria and Iraq. I mean, you know, we're hearing the number of civilian corpses and bodies that are being discovered in Mosul, for example. And, you know, we see this juxtaposition of the Russian and Syrian cooperative campaigns, for example, in Aleppo, where we know that they opened up humanitarian corridors, where they worked to actually liberate the civilians with as little civilian casualty as possible. Whereas the US in Deir ez-Zor, when they're claiming to be bombing ISIS targets, in Raqqa, when they're again claiming to be bombing ISIS targets in Mosul, we see effectively, you know, the US strategy of carpet bombing with zero regard for civilian lives. As Lavrov again has pointed out, they've deliberately targeted Syrian coalition forces, most recently hitting Hezbollah, but also targeting Russian forces on the ground near Deir ez-Zor. So, you know, this is extraordinary. We are effectively seeing a war playing out here, because the US is in Syria without any form of legality or mandate, or you know, it's completely acting as a rogue state, and it is effectively targeting now Russian positions, but Russian allied positions. So in other words, allies of Syria being Russia. And so really it is a covert war that is being waged in Syria at the moment. And I think we're seeing a huge global paradigm shift in the sense that, power is based on two things. It's based on force or it's based on trust. But the one that is based on trust is the one that will last. The US is based entirely on force. Nobody trusts it. Nobody believes it. And Syria has exposed to what extent it has deceived the world for decades. Whereas Russia is emerging as an honest broker in international affairs, and it has adhered to international law. And going forward, that is the only thing that is going to protect other prey nations from the same fate as Syria, Libya, Iraq, Ukraine, and so on, is international law and the adherence to international law. An institution that is not captive to US neocolonialism, such as is the UN, but an organization that is genuinely upholding international law and ensuring that law is maintained at all costs. And that is basically what Russia is saying. And so to most thinking people, it makes sense. And you're right, everyone's going to say, we're just Russophiles, we're Putinists, etc. But that's just a ridiculous way of trying to dismiss a solid argument, which is the fact that even if Russia has an agenda, they do tend to make that agenda pretty clear. They've been very open about their strategy. They've been very open about the reasons why they got involved in the first place. So I think huge respect to them for the way that they are, to a large extent, maneuvering around this chessboard and exposing the United States and its coalition, particularly the UK, to be duplicitous, deceitful, absolutely lawless, murderous regimes. And I have to say murderous because the number of civilians that have been killed in the US coalition attacks, not only directly from them, but obviously through their proxies also on the ground. And just coming back to that bad terrorists or slightly less bad terrorists, yes, this myth that has underpinned the entire proxy war effort in Syria for 7 years, it should be completely consigned to kind of room 101 of propaganda. It's insanity.
Absolutely.
Vanessa, thank you very much for that excellent insight. I'll just say to our viewers, as we often do, that the news is put together very quickly. We don't pre-brief each other on how the segments are going to fit together. You've mentioned UAE. I'm just about to get on to the subject of Dubai. You've talked about the criminality within the Western governments. We've had a look at the maturity of Lavrov there. Let's contrast it with this, a look inside the mind of Boris Johnson. Now, Boris has been quoted as making a very unpleasant statement about dead bodies with regard to Libya. I'll come on to that in just a second. Let's remind ourselves, though, what was going on. This is The Guardian back in 2011, and look at the title, David Cameron's Libyan War, Why the Prime Minister Felt Gaddafi Had to Be Stopped. But what I was interested in, this is from a report that we did back at the time. Let's just read a bit of this. It said it was a rare outburst from Cameron during months of calm chairmanship of the Special Cabinet Committee that ran the Libyan campaign. This is quite ridiculous, David Cameron snapped at ministers gathered in Britain's modest version of the White House Situation Room known as COBRA. Why cannot I just order they're going to go, and I will provide a, quote, waiver and indemnity on the legalities? Oh. So there we have it. Now, what was he talking about? The British government, or David Cameron and his cabal, wanted to ship 200 million brand new Libyan banknotes, which had just been printed in Britain by De La Rue Company and were worth at that time £1 billion. He wanted to airlift those from an airfield in Kent to the rebels in Libya to help unseat Gaddafi. And there, as you say, Vanessa, is David Cameron saying, I'm not interested in whether this is legal. I don't care about the law. We just want to change that so I can get those notes over. And it goes to say that this encapsulated some of the key themes of Cameron's first war as Prime Minister. What a statement that is, that here's Cameron and his Conservative colleagues just taking us into a series of wars. So that was Libya and what was going on in the background, the British government funding the terrorists. And let's come back to Boris Johnson. Now, he was at a fringe group meeting, and this is what he had to say in front of the cameras. I look at Libya, it's an incredible country, bone white sands, beautiful sea, Caesar's palace, obviously you know the real one. There's a group of UK business peoples, actually some wonderful guys. They have a brilliant vision to turn Sirte into, with the help of the municipality, the next Dubai. That's what he said, but this is the key bit. The only thing they've got to do is clear the dead bodies away. And at this point in the audio, the video, you can hear the audience laughing. So he knows some people. They're going to turn part of Libya into Dubai. The only thing we've got to do is get those dead bodies away. And the audience, which are purely political and press and media, start laughing. This is pretty disgusting stuff. Now, he attempted to counter this by getting on Twitter, and he said he was making a point about the need for optimism in Libya after a recent visit to the country. The reality there is the clearing of corpses of Daesh fighters have been made much more difficult by IEDs and booby traps. This is despicable stuff. And what have we got? We've got a mixture of big corporate interests and death. How does he present himself on Twitter? Well, of course, he's a friend of the veterans, Mike. I find this image sickening because these elderly veterans, they went out there and they did the business. He is making a complete fool of them. This is how he tried to get his way out of this. So Britain's playing a key role in reconstruction. I'll take you through this very quickly and then we'll get Vanessa to comment. But who was running the fringe meeting? Well, it was Baroness Philippa Stroud. And she's quoted in the paper, or the dialogue in the paper about her is this: the host of the conference fringe event, Legatum Institute Chief Executive Baroness Stroud, stepped in to say, next question, as the Foreign Secretary continued to speak. So she hosted the meeting and she protected Boris Johnson after he was effectively laughing at the piled bodies. So no doubt the question for our audience is who or what is the Legatum Institute? Well, let's bring it in. Here it is, promoting policies that lift people from poverty to prosperity. Sounds good, Mike? Sounds good, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, let's put the thing together. Here's Boris Johnson. He said, never mind the dead bodies. Some wonderful UK business people want to make Sirte a new Dubai. Well, who were the wonderful people? Here's the lady herself, Baroness Stroud. Here's the Legatum Institute. And oh dear, it happens to be linked in with this Legatum. We're into hedge funds now. And if we have a little look as where this hedge fund is based, it's just a coincidence. It's United Arab Emirates, Dubai.
In Dubai. So Boris's best buddies are going to stick billions of dollars of dirty money into Libya now to turn Sirte into a new Dubai. So
British government gets the money in to help the terrorist groups unseat Gaddafi, and then in come the cabal to start making big bucks. Now, we encourage people to go and look at this yourself. Here's part of the website for Legatum Institute, and you'll be interested in the people. I had to do a little video of this, but if you go through, these are banking interests, including JP Morgan, Rothschild. These are major players in huge corporate global interests. Just go and have a look at this yourself. And if we get on to the main group, we've got more bankers as well, including one gentleman there who, if we have a look at him at the bottom of the screen, he's Philip Vassilou, and he's worked with Goldman Sachs, as you do, but he was also part of the Dubai Development and Investment Authority. That's a bit of a coincidence, Mike, I'm sure you'll think. So there's Boris. Any connections with this team? Well, of course, he's helping the wider Legatum promote their Prosperity for All initiative.
Right.
So you can have a look on the internet. It's very interesting to find. But Boris Johnson is part of this group. He's promoting their work. Rothschild bankers, UBS, you name it, they're all in there.
So actually his dirty little joke was a cynical gloat at the fact that he's potentially
helped create it.
Helping he's created the mess in the first place. Now he's helping rebuild. He's possibly going to make millions out of this.
Absolutely. This is some of the most vile stuff I've said. And I'm just going to end by the fact that as I worked through this, I discovered this, and I'm going to encourage people to go and see it. This is eureferendum.com. This is Richard North. And if you go to this particular article, Brexit, Disaster Capitalism, he has got a very, very detailed expose on Legatum, and he's coming in at the direction that they were in the background helping to create a Brexit chaos in order to force through wider policy. And he's even talking about Danny Kruger, of course, was the Tory candidate who admitted that the Tories were going to introduce a period of quote, constructive chaos in order to help Britain move forward into the new globalist order. When we dig carefully, Vanessa, it is so easy to expose these people for what they are. The British government funding terrorism, and here's the truth coming to light now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? You know, we heard Madeleine Albright say that the starvation of 500,000 Iraqi children was a price that was worth it. We've seen Hillary Clinton cackling over the death and sodomization of Gaddafi. We see there was a report in Reuters actually yesterday, and I'll just read it, the sort of the front paragraph. Israel's defense minister said on Tuesday President Bashar al-Assad was winning Syria's civil war and urged the United States to weigh in as Damascus's Iranian and Hezbollah allies gain ground. So in other words, you know, there's always behind each of these interventions and these humanitarian disasters, and even in Yemen, where we know that it's of biblical proportions, the human suffering that is going on in Yemen, when we see the depth of depravity and profiteering from this human misery, if we take one thing away from this, is that we should never, ever, ever believe one word that comes out of these creatures' mouths when they claim that they are intervening in any other nation under a humanitarian pretext. Please, you know, I urge everybody to at least take that away, because when you see Boris making a speech like this, as you say, literally planning to build some sort of opulent, palatial, corporate elite city on the bones and the carcasses and the corpses of our government's criminal actions in Libya, then please do not believe him when he turns around and tells us that they are in Syria to save lives, or that they are in Yemen to prevent human disaster. Please, you know, we have to stop buying into this humanitarian cloak of invisibility that is draped over their criminal atrocities and their murderous acts in all of these nations into which they have intervened.
Perfect, Vanessa. Couldn't have done it better myself, because let's talk about the Disasters Emergency Committee. Now, of course, this is the Disasters Emergency Committee in the UK, brings together 13 leading UK charities. Action Aid, Age International, British Red Cross, CAFOD, Care International, Christian Aid, Concern Worldwide, Islamic Relief Worldwide, Oxfam, Plan International UK, Save the Children, Tear Fund and World Vision. And of course they jointly really raise money for certain things. And the latest one that they're raising money for, if you were listening to Radio 4 this morning at 5 to 9, you would have heard their campaign for Rohingya disaster relief. Now, the government today has pledged extra help, they say, for humanitarian help for the victims of what they're describing as the Burmese military's atrocities. They're going to match donations up to £3 million made to the DEC, to the Disasters Emergency Committee. This is what Priti Patel had to say. I'm appalled that more than 500,000 Rohingya have been forced to flee their homes because of the horrific violence in Burma. She's such a nice lady. Well, of course, what they're saying is that 500,000 people have had to leave, and that they're all mostly women and children. But if you look at the images that they're publishing, there aren't too many women and children in it. It's mostly men. So we have UK Aid pushing out stuff to people. There are some women there, but not very many in their photographs. But again, Brian, we have another situation here which appears on the face of it to be have some parallels to what's happened in Syria, in the sense that the Burmese, and this is a complex situation, I'm not going to apologise for the Burmese authorities at all, but there's more to this story than is being presented in the mainstream press. The burning of the homes of the Rohingya that's caused this latest migration in the last 6 weeks or so seems to be as a result of extremists within their own population attacking their own population in order to cause this problem. And of course, we've got to remember that British money is going into this area, into these people, and everywhere we see UK aid money going, we see the same types of activities and the same types of propaganda then appearing in the mainstream media, and it's incredible. And here we are. I'm sorry, I haven't formatted that properly, but here we are. Aung San Suu Kyi now has been stripped of the freedom of the city of Oxford. We keep the propaganda going because it's all the fault of the Burmese government. It's nothing to do with Western intervention and the British government, and the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi is no longer singing the British government, the Foreign Office tune.
Yeah, and it's particularly obscene the city of Oxford should do that. It's supposed to be a seat of learning and understanding, when of course we can say, if we have a look at our politicians, overwhelmingly where have they come out of? The two great universities, Oxford and Cambridge. So I would start my cleansing by actually shutting down those two organisations. That's a personal opinion. No doubt I'll upset a few people, but I think there's some merit to it.
Right, let's press on. Well, Michael Fallon has announced the Common Support Model. This is fantastic. It's a £1 billion fund which is going to support the growing Royal Naval Fleet. Brian, it's going to sustain 1,000 jobs. This is the Common Support Model. It provides a framework for comprehensive support across the fleet of warships for decades to come in one overarching arrangement. It will maintain the likes of the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carriers. It's going to maintain the new Type 26 and Type 31 frigates, and it's going to bring together separate support agreements for individual ship types under a single, more efficient and more manageable model worth around £1 billion. And so they have apparently issued 10 of the 16 agreements so far, £794 million. And what fascinated me was, why are they announcing this now if they've only issued 10 of the 16 agreements? And Brian, my feeling is that what they've done is they have issued 10 contracts to UK-based firms. The other 6 contracts aren't going to go to UK-based firms, so they've put this out into the headlines now so that any mainstream media that picks up on this will get the headlines out of the way before the European type and the US contracts get delivered, and the news agenda will have moved on and they won't have to discuss it.
And we have to add to that of course the contracts will go out to European countries. This was the plan in the background anyway, that the whole of the defence procurement infrastructure was going to be spread pan-EU. That was part of the creation of the unified EU military. I think because the spotlight's really come on them, they're trying to put this out early to take the pressure off, as you say. One of our viewers spotted that there was a green and a purple ship next to each other at the centre of those, the classic common purpose colours. Personally, I don't think that would have been accidental. I think that very often there's these little messages are put forward in government communications, but this is the government squirming because it's now becoming very clear the objective was to break up the British military and the whole procurement into little pieces in order to help lever us into that unified EU military. The lid's off now. It's such a shame that we still do not seem to have any senior British military officers serving or retired with the guts to actually speak out about what's happening. Cowardice seems to be the order of the day, Mike.
Well, we're over time, so I'm just briefly going to cover this. Now, early in September, we were talking about the Russian military exercises taking place in Belarus, Zapad 2017. All kinds of hysteria over that, mainly being driven from NATO and the UK. Well, here we've got one voice of sanity, Stars and Stripes. This is from the 20th of September, after Zapad 2017 had finished. After all the anxiety, Russia's Zapad exercise ends without provocation, was the headline. Now, why am I mentioning an article from the 20th of September? Because the hysteria continues. It just is unbelievable. This exercise has come and gone. It was an exercise based on a scenario of internal insurgency. It wasn't anything internationalist at all. It wasn't the type of scenario that NATO has been using with just about every exercise that they've been running over the last couple of years. But here we go, article after article. So this is Eric Schmidt in the New York Times. Vast exercise demonstrated Russia's growing military prowess. This is the Jamestown Journal, or whatever it's called, Zapad 2017, a test for the West. We've got Chatham House, 5 things to know about the Zapad 2017 military exercise. These are all published within the last few days, Brian, yesterday and a couple of days ago. And Newsweek, how Russia got away with masking a war game of more than 40,000 troops. The hysteria continues, and anybody that suggests that, anybody that's criticizing this is simply a mouthpiece for the Russians needs their heads examined, because what we're seeing in the media is absolute insanity.
Well, insanity and very carefully crafted propaganda by the West. And I do find it astonishing to sit here in 2017. The world is reversed from those Cold War days where the propaganda appeared to come from one side. We're now seeing such a sleek Western propaganda machine. Vanessa, just a few seconds closing comment, if you wish.
Where's Morgan Freeman?
Yes. Is that it then?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, super. Thank you.
I think that just sums up the whole ridiculousness of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's become a Hollywood exercise. It's not even based in any sort of reality or truth or fact.
Yeah.
I mean, it's extraordinary. In the meantime, of course, the Russian embassy in Washington is being raided, which is by the United States officials, which I just, nobody's paying any attention to this. I mean, this is a highly aggressive act that is being committed by American officials in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vanessa, as always, thank you very much for joining us. What an incredible news as these pieces come together so quickly and so clearly. But the facts remain that we are looking at a criminal elite running both the UK and the USA. They need to be removed in an appropriate way if we're going to sort these problems out. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.